On Monday, May 18th, I'll call to order the Winooski City Council meeting. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Deputy Mayor Haleh Colston.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
First up is agenda review. Are there any questions or concerns about the order of these agenda items? All right. Next up is public comment. This is a chance for members of the public to speak on any item that is not listed on the agenda. I know we do have Marguerite Edelman here who wanted to make a statement. Marguerite, can you hear me? I will send her a chat.
Okay, can you hear me? You can?
Yes.
Okay. I'm so sorry. My sound is not working and I don't have video on this computer and I don't know why this is happening. But I did prepare a public comment and I did mail it to all of you just before the meeting with some attachments. And I'll read it because I want it to be precise. My name is Marguerite Edelman and I am a Winooski resident. And many of us who attended the F-35 open houses at the airport last year made recommendations that the airport apply for an FAA grant for sound monitoring and tracking equipment. At that time, we were lucky to meet with Richard Doucette, who is with the Federal Aviation Administrator, and he is an administrator there. Recently, I emailed Jean Richards at the airport, who forwarded my email to Nick Longo to find out about the sound monitoring and tracking equipment grant. I was told that the airport was applying for the sound mitigation grant, which I quickly discovered is not the same thing as the sound monitoring and tracking grant. The sound mitigation grant, which is obviously needed, will look at sound levels in particular homes and determine what kind and level of sound mitigation is needed. This grant, which is due in mid-June, they did extend the deadline slightly, will be submitted, but will not do what many of us were asking for, which was regular and continual sound monitoring and tracking at set locations in and around the airport, including in Winooski. Nick said that they are submitting a new NCP. Now, a lot of this I'm learning myself, which sounds like it's the plan for the airport. That includes the sound monitoring and tracking in the airport overview. However, we have a letter of approval from Richard Doucette that includes the sound monitoring and tracking in the last NCP that was done in 2008. In other words, the airport doesn't need a new NCP to apply for that sound monitoring and tracking equipment. And I have this in a statement from Richard Doucette, which I forwarded to you in my email. It is our understanding that a sound monitoring and tracking grant could also be submitted by mid-June of this year for this equipment. However, it appears that the airport is putting this off until proposals are due in May, June of 2021, when they have a new NCP in place, which means funding for the project would not come until the end of 2021, and the equipment would likely not even be set up or operational until 2022, which is about the time that the new sound maps will come out. Many of us feel that this is really unacceptable and that the airport has purposely delayed writing a grant for the sound monitoring equipment since a new NCP was not necessary to submit this FAA grant. And we encourage Mayor Lott to contact Mayor Weinberger and the Burlington City Council and urgently request that the airport prepare and submit a grant in mid-June for the sound monitoring and tracking equipment. There are grant models available out there and vendors. I've done a lot of that research already, and it can and should be done on an expedited basis. We should not, as citizens of Winooski, have to wait until 2022 for this regular and long-term monitoring of sound in our community to take place. And as I've said, I've sent you all the information. I'd also be happy to share Nick Longo's emails. He hasn't answered any of the recent ones. And I really feel like we have been led on. It's taken me weeks to get this information. And I feel, that when we had that open house, we were told that that grant could be submitted. And many of us put that in the recommendation for the city and for the airport plan. So thank you very much for your time.
I just chatted, since Marguerite can't hear us, that we'll take a look at the information she shared and follow up with Burlington to the airport. We are in ongoing conversations about the NCP, about the noise mitigation, about funding for noise monitoring. So we will follow up on that, and as usual, produce public updates when information is available. We have another public comment. Terry Zygmunt.
Hi. So I'm actually here to talk about something that you all saw at the April 20th meeting. There was a parking relief waiver that was introduced to the council on April 20th. I'm a member of the Planning Commission. I voted to approve the idea of forwarding to the council. I voted to approve that under duress, was not in support of the of the parking waiver. The only reason that I actually voted to forward it on was because we were, or I guess I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for others on the Planning Commission. I was under the impression that it was mostly to help with the high school with their renovation. And they were looking for relief from the parking requirements. And we talked about this at two different Planning Commission meetings. We spent, I would say, at least 2 hours as a commission deliberating this. It wasn't an easy decision for any of us to vote to approve this. And as I read the minutes and actually spoke with one of the city councilors after this meeting, when I read the minutes from the April 20th meeting, it was my understanding that the chair of our commission was going to be at the city council meeting and was going to make it very clear that there was a lot of reluctance and there was a lot of apprehension, and there were people that were worried about this parking waiver and worried about how it would be used. And I can only speak for myself by saying that I was very concerned that it was going to be used by developers to get relief to the parking requirements, and that it was going to push parking into the surrounding neighborhoods in the gateway districts, which I think we've already seen a little bit of that. And that was part of the reason that many of the people on the Planning Commission were concerned. And once City Council saw this, immediately at the next Development Review Board meeting, there were two parking waiver requests. One was for the high school, and the other one was for a development at 355 Main Street, which was a developer who was asking for relief from parking. And if you councilors take a look at that, those deliberations, you will see that I was there and another member of planning was there. We were both concerned about this. We were concerned about it for two reasons. I was concerned about it mostly because of the pushing parking into the neighboring streets, Bellevue Street specifically. And that was mentioned in this developer's waiver. He did mention that there was plenty of parking available on Bellevue Street, so that wasn't going to be a problem. And he also was mentioned that it was only going to be for a couple of commercial locations, commercial spaces that he had, and there were only going to be a few cars. And so didn't really need to have that much parking for it. And I guess the bottom line, that the only reason that I'm here tonight is because I want to make it clear to the city council that there were people on the planning commission, there are people on the planning commission who are not excited about this parking waiver. We really voted for it and passed it to you because we were concerned about the high school not being able to move forward with their development. We are concerned about it being used by the very thing that it was used by a developer for at the last development review meeting where this came up. And so I just want you all to know that I am not in support of this as a member of the planning commission. I feel like it wasn't clear to us exactly the process that was going to be used by developers if they did need to get this request for parking relief. It was my understanding that it was going to be much more difficult for developers to do this, that they were going to have to get an engineering report, which this developer did. But oddly, or ironically, maybe, he owns the engineering firm that provided the engineering report about parking and the parking study. So that raised a flag for me as a conflict of interest, but didn't seem to concern the development review board at all. So anyhow, I'm sorry if I'm a little disorganized. I was working on a project not related to this all day today and didn't have a chance to write a statement, but that I just wanted to share that information with the city council.
Thank you, Terry. If you all may recall, we set a public hearing for that item for June 15th, at which time we'll be able to have further deliberation and hear from members of the public. I would remind councilors that at our last discussion, we were hesitant if June 15th was too soon to get deep engagement, and would consider having additional hearings to make sure that we hear from a broad swath of the public before making a decision on that item.
Well, as a member of the planning commission, I'm going to ask you to please have more than just one public hearing about this, because I don't feel that my voice was accurately represented when this was introduced to city council the last time. I know that the person that was the chair of our commission that was supposed to deliver that message wasn't at that meeting. And so I'm just asking you to please, council, please consider that more public input is needed on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a comment at this time? Oh, and as a reminder, you can use the chat. You can click on raise hand in the participant panel, or if you want to just go off mute and announce yourself. There are various ways to alert me. All right, we will move on then to our consent agenda. We have 4 items for consent agenda this evening. We have our minutes from City Council and Liquor Control meetings of May 4th, payroll warrant April 19th to May 2nd, and accounts payable warrant ending May 15th. Implementation of Winooski All Hazard Mitigation Plan 2019 report, and the renewal of Erica Bailey's appointment as Deputy Health Officer. Are there any questions or concerns about consent agenda items? Seeing and hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Amy, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. We will move next to council reports. Can I start with you this week, Amy?
Yes, I actually don't have anything to report on.
Great. Jim, how about you?
I likewise do not have anything to report on.
And Hal?
Ditto. I have nothing to report at this time.
So efficient. I did attend the Planning Commission reconvened remote meetings as we had decided at our last meeting last Thursday. You heard in public comment what a lot of the discussion was that evening. So there is ongoing discussion about parking regulations. That is the current focus. And to reiterate, we do not make changes to those regulations without public hearings and ensuring public input to those types of changes. City Manager Jesse Baker and I also participated in a virtual town hall, sharing out details about the emergency ordinance providing relief from property tax and utility payments. Also shared some updates on various projects for folks who couldn't attend. That video is available on channel 17 and on YouTube. Paul will probably drop a link somewhere in the chat at some point. And I have also continued to participate in weekly Winooski leadership meeting. Jesse is there, Hal is often there, multiple other stakeholders in our community, and have continued to pass information from that I am hearing from those calls and others onto our legislative delegation. I will turn it over to Jesse for city updates.
Great, thank you. I do have a number of updates today, so bear with me for a few minutes. Want to start with a huge thank you to the community for paying their property taxes. And we can get into this more a little bit in the emergency ordinance discussion, but as of midday today, we had 92% collection on our fourth quarter property tax payments. That represents only a 2% overall for the year delinquency rate. So that's just about where we were at the end of the year during the 2008 recession. And we still anticipate bringing in additional dollars in the next weeks before the end of the fiscal year. So that is wonderful news for us to be able to continue our operations. And again, so thankful to the Winooski residents for stepping up and making those payments. We are still awaiting our third quarter local options tax receipts from the state. So that's a big question mark for us still on the revenue front. And of course, we've seen a huge hit to our parking fund receipts. So we are preparing a full revenue, or Angela is preparing a full revenue projection report for you for your June 1st council meeting. Want to acknowledge that last week was National Police Week and send a sincere thanks to our police officers and law enforcement professionals who keep us safe every day. We're very sad this year not to be able to do, we usually do a public safety day this week every year. Obviously, we are not doing it this year, but we look forward to doing it when we can reopen such events. This week is actually Emergency Medical Services Week, EMS Week. As you probably all know, St. Michael's provides emergency medical services for Winooski, for the city of Winooski writ large, and does that free of charge to the property taxpayers. So it's a huge benefit they provide to us. Last year, they answered over 1,200 calls in the city of Winooski. So I want to acknowledge their efforts and their support to Winooski this week, especially. Moving into a few other updates, the governor has recently announced that he anticipates opening restaurants for outdoor seating in the next several weeks. In response to that, Heather is working with downtown Winooski and some of the businesses to explore a pilot concept of allowing businesses to use the parking spaces right in front of their businesses for extended outdoor seating. That's still under discussion, but as it might move quickly between now and the next city council meeting, I wanted you to know we were considering that pilot for this year. We are also having internal conversations as a result about parking enforcement and when do we open that up. We are, obviously concerned from a revenue perspective, but also concerned from a business support perspective. We want people to come and access our business community, but we don't want them to just park all day in a spot that could be used for turnover of our business community as it reopens. So just a heads up that we are exploring both of those things. Also slightly COVID related, we are continuing to work closely, John Rauscher and Ray, with the Myers Memorial Pool contractors. Our big challenge at the moment is we have an out-of-state subcontractor whose work he has 4 days of work required in the city. It's very challenging to get them up and working right now with the quarantine challenges. So we are still uncertain about how that moves forward. However, in conversations with them this week, and John and Ray, what we would like to share with you today is at the June 1st council meeting, we will make an announcement about the pool operations for the summer. So more to come on that. We do know that the community really wants a decision on that. So we are committing to making that by June 1st. As the mayor mentioned, several of the policy commissions are starting to meet. So the Charter Commission is meeting virtually tomorrow evening. That will be through Zoom like this. So if members of the public are interested in calling into that, they are more than welcome. Our Project Review Committee, which is the group that reviews projects in the form-based code zoning, is meeting at Thursday at 11 a.m. to look at 2 projects. One, a duplex on Morehouse Drive, which is on the Miles Bay corridor, and not necessarily a resubmittal, but a revamp of the Main Street apartments, the former Main and Mansion apartments. So we'll be reviewing both those. And then Municipal Infrastructure will meet on Thursday, May 28th. We had a kickoff meeting with VHB, who, as you may remember, was the historic preservation consultant. They are, in response to COVID, they are reversing their workflow. So initially they were going to do an extensive public process and then an inventory of the city. They are now going to do that in reverse. So they are starting with the data collection and documenting the historic documents. And then we'll bring that to a public process in the second half of the contract. So it may actually be better for the public in the long run because they'll have that data to go off of. To share a couple of community services updates. We Thrive, Kate Anderson, our great Thrive director, received about $1,000 grant from the Vermont Children's Trust Foundation for equipment to do some of her maker spaces ideas with Thrive. So a 3D printer and some tablets and robotic materials. So good job to her for finding additional funds. Just a reminder, I mentioned this last week, but we are doing Wednesday meals for seniors, anyone 65 and older. If you're interested in that, call anyone 60 and older. It's a partnership with AgeWell. And if you're interested in that, call the Senior Center at 655-6425. And that can be delivered to your home as well. So again, for senior meals, 655-6425. Winooski Rec has launched their second scavenger hunt, which is now live, including both indoor and outdoor items. That is open now and continuing until this coming Thursday, May 21st. And the winners will get a $25 gift card to Papa Frank's. And then finally, and very excitingly, Carol and I wanted to acknowledge that on Thursday, the 24th, marks Janet's 30th anniversary with the city of Winooski. So it's a big milestone, and we're so thankful to have her. And obviously, she's not on this call, but if you have a moment to shoot her a quick acknowledgement email, again, her 30 years of service will be on Thursday, May 21st. And that's all I've got. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessie. We will move now to our regular items. So our first item is for approval, reenacting resolution for a Chapter 30 emergency ordinance to alleviate financial pressures as a result of COVID-19. Jessie, please provide us an update here.
Sure. So this, as you remember, at your second meeting in April, you adopted a resolution establishing an emergency ordinance for financial relief. Per our city charter, those emergency ordinances are only good for 30 days. So we are bringing this to you to reenact for another 30 days. There is one change in this resolution from the previous resolution you passed, which is with the legislative passage of S344 and the governor's signature, municipalities now have the ability to waive interest payments on late property tax payments. So we know you were interested in that previously. We have included that in this resolution. We have not attached the interest as of today. So if you are interested in keeping, moving that forward, that is in this resolution, or we can take it out.
Thank you. I am thankful to hear that the governor signed off, the legislature passed that. I believe the impression I got was that we were very much interested in being able to waive interest in addition to penalties for late payments to help folks out. Are there any questions or concerns from council about reenacting this ordinance? Any questions from members of the public? I will say, I think we'll need some sort of additional communication to clarify for folks that now interest could be waived with this change. Something that staff can discuss later. So hearing no questions or concerns, I would entertain a motion to approve reenacting resolution for Chapter 30 Emergency Ordinance.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Hal, second by, Jesse.
Sorry. Just one quick clarifying point to the communication comment. We're happy to put out communication on this. But just to be clear, what this means is we will just not attach interest to the 180 people who have still not paid their property taxes for 30 days. So they'll pay whatever they pay. Interest will just not be attached. They will not, just to, you had previously encouraged us not to put barriers in place. So they will not have to apply or do anything to have that interest waived. It will just be there. So sorry,
right.
Just to clarify that.
I was just thinking about where this exists on our website and how it makes mention about interest being up in the air.
Yep.
Did that raise any new questions from anyone? All right. Can I again take a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Hal, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. Next on the agenda is introduction to interim zoning bylaws for downtown core zoning district, which Eric will walk us through.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm here tonight to provide you information on a proposed interim zoning that will help to clarify the district boundaries for the downtown core zoning district. That's the only area that this will impact. And what we're looking for tonight is, one, to introduce the information to you, but also to request scheduling a public hearing on the interim zoning for June 15th. Just as a little bit of background, our current regulations include a zoning map which addresses all zoning throughout the entire city of Winooski. We additionally have a specific map that's included in Appendix C of our regulations that addresses the downtown core zoning district. It's our building height and location map. And that map has reference to what's shown as a green space boundary, which when it was originally developed was coincident with a wetland boundary. Additionally, in that Appendix C, there's a very specific description of the zoning district and that it's intended to follow this green space boundary. So over the years, as the maps have changed and the zoning has been updated, the current zoning map that addresses the zoning citywide does not reflect this green space boundary, nor does it reflect the changes that have occurred to the wetland over the years that have adjusted this boundary. So the purpose of this interim zoning would be to incorporate language into our current regulations that basically clarifies the fact that the green space boundary is intended to be the wetland boundary. That's the one piece right now that I feel is missing, that does not fully provide me as the zoning administrator the ability to interpret the regulations to adjust that line accordingly. So this interim zoning would help clarify that fact to make the interpretation. So included with your agenda was a memo from me kind of outlining the history of the downtown core zoning, and then kind of the interim zoning process and how it's been used in other instances in the city. Probably one of the more significant examples is with the parking regulations that currently are in place for downtown, was all done through an interim zoning, as well as the downtown core district itself. There's also a draft of a potential resolution that would actually allow you to adopt the interim zoning, and then just a sample of what the change would actually look like if we were to put it into place in the regulations. So it's really just adding a few lines to section 2.3 in the regulations. So in addition to that, I sent out some information today based on some questions from Councilor Duncan to hopefully clarify some of the other questions that have come up about this. So again, tonight we're looking to introduce this, answer any questions, and have you all consider setting a hearing for June 15th.
Eric. Jim, did you want to start? Are there some questions that you wanted to talk through still?
Well, I would want to start out by thanking Eric for providing the additional information, and the questions that I had circulated were really around kind of the fluidity of this boundary and the long-term impacts of this zoning change, or that this change would have in tying planning and development boundary to an ecological process. As Eric has pointed out in the memo, this boundary has shifted twice, and the wetland delineations are really only considered good for about 5 years, so it will potentially move again. So I was asking questions about how close we get to the flood zone, what it means for future development. I guess my questions, after kind of looking at some of the geographic information, is around what other options are there to, what problem is this trying to solve, and are there other options besides tying this boundary to a line that will move in time and potentially could move back in towards development, create non-conforming uses? I mean, are there other options for resolving the interpretation issue that would allow us to have this boundary as originally envisioned and kind of approved by the community?
So I think one of the advantages to having this come forward as an interim zoning is that it really is intended to be a short-term fix. So that, because right now we have a development proposal that you'll hear about, I believe the next item on the agenda, where this interpretation is kind of critical for establishing where the zoning boundary line is for that project moving forward. So having this kind of shorter term option, I think, is beneficial so that we can move that project forward. With that said, an interim zoning is only good for 2 years, and we're currently working with the Planning Commission on some larger amendments and edits to our regulations. And probably what we would look at doing is, with the Planning Commission process, look at establishing how we can maybe better define what the zoning boundaries are for the downtown core, and maybe uncouple it from this wetland delineation so that it is a more solid line on the ground. I don't think when we get to that point, it will be, pretty much all of downtown will already be developed. So we'll have a better understanding of where any property boundary adjustments have been made to accommodate development. So we can more closely tie the zoning lines to property boundaries, which is a more common method to do it. So I think we would look to have a better solution in the future for how to address the district boundaries. But for right now, this is kind of an interim step to get us to that point.
Thanks. And just one follow-up, the Planning Commission hasn't looked at this. Is there a potential for them to weigh in before the June 15th meeting?
There is. So the Planning Commission will meet again on June 11th. So they will have a meeting a few days before. So it's not a lot of time, but at least that way, we wanted to get it in front of you all tonight first to see if you were interested in setting that hearing for that date before taking it forward to the Planning Commission. So we definitely will bring this up with the Planning Commission at their next meeting so that they have a chance to be aware of it. With the interim zoning process, it really only involves council directly. So the Planning Commission does not need to weigh in on on the actual language, and they don't have any hearings as well. So it does, I don't want to say it eliminates them from the process, but it's kind of intended to be a more expedited process with just counsel. So giving planning commission the opportunity to provide any feedback, I think is advantageous. So yes, there will be the opportunity at their next meeting.
Thanks.
Other questions from council? Something I do want to clarify, it seems to me that this short-term solution is addressing an issue with a single parcel that is yet to be developed. Given that the rest of the parcels along that sort of easterly side of the downtown core are already developed, it seems like this is unlikely to have a future impact. If we're addressing this in the next couple of years, it's unlikely that those properties would be redeveloped. And so this wouldn't be a large impact beyond this specific project. Am I interpreting that right, Eric?
I would say yes. The other part of that too is, even if those other properties were to look at any type of redevelopment, it would have to go through council as well, because they're all in the downtown core and would require some form of an Act 250 amendment. Additionally, there may need to be further property boundary adjustments for those other parcels that are currently developed in order for them to really do anything that would be significant, which again would come back through council, since you control all the property surrounding that eastern end. So it's possible that something could happen, but it would not happen without your scrutiny of the project moving forward.
Jim.
But to clarify, I guess I would wonder why we need to make an interim rule that could be redone as soon as a new delineation is done. And is there if there's an adjustment needed to manage the build out of this final parcel, I think there's value to having green space, whether or not it's delineated wetland or not in that area. And I'm questioning the value of, again, moving this line and allowing it to move again in the future without any change to zoning, right? If the delineation is redone in 2021, the zoning boundary could move at that time further in, and we could see impacts in the green space adjacent to a flood zone. So I just would be looking for the most parsimonious and the most restrictive solution that we could have in this case, when we're looking at our natural resource base that we have in the city. So I do think that there would be value in hearing from the Planning Commission on this, and making sure that they don't identify any potential short-term or medium-term issues. Because if this could be expired in 2 years, it could be made permanent in 3. I'd like to know that, and that could be part of the major update. But if we're really trying to solve a particular problem with this, I think providing one that doesn't move the line later without further review would be worthwhile.
Are there any questions or comments from members of the public? Again, you can use the chat, you can use the raise hand feature in the participant panel, or announce yourself in order to alert me. All right, hearing no further comment, staff is recommending that we schedule a public hearing on this for June 15th. We will also be having a public hearing that evening on the parking waiver. Does someone want to make a motion to set the hearing for June 15th?
So
moved.
Motion by Amy, second by Hal. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. So we will have a broad public engagement evening, I hope, on our June 15th meeting. Thank you, Eric. And our next item on the agenda, C, is for discussion, development update on Lot 70 Abenaki Way, which Heather will introduce for us.
Yep, good evening all. As you know, late last summer, we went through an RFP process looking for a potential developer for lot 70 or 17 Abenaki Way. As a result of that, we awarded the potential to negotiate with us to Nettie Real Estate and initiated those negotiations in November of 2019. Since then, we have arrived at a development agreement that proposes to develop the site with a municipal parking garage with air rights over that for a hotel and new office space. Through the development agreement, the city will retain the ownership of the parking structure and the air rights will be transferred to support the development of the hotel and office space. Over the last few months, staff has been working pretty diligently with Nettie Real Estate to develop designs and to move forward with the project. And as you know, at your March 16th meeting, I believe it was, City Council approved City Manager Jesse Baker to sign off on an Act 250 amendment for the project in order to avoid any delays, with an understanding that City Council would have an opportunity to weigh in on the designs as we move forward with them. So that is set to happen at your next meeting. This is just for an update from the developer so that you see the direction that they're going, so the public has a chance to weigh in, and then we'll come back again for the design review at our next meeting on June 15th. So I have with us today Bill Niquette and Doug Nettie from Nettie Real Estate, and they have some drawings for us so you can get a first glimpse of what it is that they're proposing. So I'm going to have Jessie share her screen. She has those drawings, and I'm going to open it up to welcome Bill and Doug. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks a lot, Heather. This is Doug Nettie. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for this opportunity to tell you a little bit more about our joint project. We're really quite excited about it. We've been working really quite hard with Jesse and Heather and John and Eric on this for the last 6 or 7 months, and we feel good about where it is, and we feel good that we're ready to submit our Act 250 permit, and we feel really good that we've hired a really, I think, talented design group. We have 3 different architects working on different parts of this project. We have a couple different engineering firms working on the design. And I think the product is something I'm quite happy about and proud about. I really was interested in developing something that was unique and creative on this parcel, and not doing something that was more cookie cutter and not very exciting. So we're making a lot of progress on our hotel. We do have a hotel partner, as you might recall. Our partner is Lodging Capital Partners. They're out of Chicago. One of the partners in the firm is Ian Davis, who's my neighbor and where I live in Colchester. So that's how we got together. But they've been a great partner and very helpful with the insight of the project and giving us good guidance. In terms of making the hotel something not cookie cutter, we're pursuing a Marriott brand called Tribute, and it's more boutique-y. It's a soft brand that allows us to be creative, to reflect a design that works within the community and within the market. So we're excited about the direction we're going with the hotel, and it's going to have some real unique amenities. One of the amenities I think it's going to be important for the city is that we're really activating that southwest corner with a lot of glass and for a retail presence on the street right there. Well, actually, the picture down below would show it a little bit better. If you go towards the river now, right there. So we're envisioning a coffee shop there, and which will be community based. Another major amenity on the hotel is our rooftop restaurant and bar with about a 3,000 square foot deck off of that, which will be shared by an events meeting space. So that's something that I get excited about. It's really something that's not offered or presented in the marketplace currently. And again, I wanted to do something here in Winooski that was really something above, the normal amenities for a hotel, and also in terms of the design. So I think that's going to be quite nice. And we also are going to have a rooftop fitness area up there. The other thing that I'm getting really excited about, Jess, if you can go to the site plan, is that right now there's a 3-phase power pole at the end of Winooski Falls Way, which I'm looking forward to removing. But we're really trying to create a really beautiful bookend to the downtown city and to the end of Winooski Falls Way by removing that power pole, building this public boardwalk out to Cassavant Park with seating, and I think it's just going to be a really, really nice entrance to the park. And we have some talented landscape architects with Wagner and Hodgson who are proposing brick pavers around the circle and sculptures and art and great landscaping. So I really think this is going to be a really beautiful part of downtown Winooski for the public. I think we're really going to be successful in this design of activating the corner of the hotel and also the front of the hotel and also east of the hotel going to the park for activity for people walking and biking and doing other things. So that's a little bit about the hotel, and the beauty of the hotel for downtowns is that it's an economic engine, because every night there's new people that arrive and they come downtown and they're going to eat and drink and shop and do different things. So I think that's going to help the downtown businesses quite a bit. So that's all the rosy stuff about the hotel. The difficult stuff about the hotel is right now we're in a really challenging time to finance a hotel, as all the hotels in the state of Vermont are currently shut down. But we're submitting our financing request to some different banks over the next 60, 90 days, and we hope to have some traction where we might get some commitments for some banks if the economic conditions continue to improve through the rest of the summer and fall, where we can finalize our financing for a hotel and keep this project on schedule. So that's a little bit about the project overall, and I'm happy to take some questions, but I was going to have Bill Niquette, who's the project manager and also a partner in the hotel, chat about the VIC building and the garage and anything else that Bill would like to talk about.
Well,
sorry
thanks,
that I didn't have video, but my video is not working tonight.
Well, thanks, Doug, and thank you, Jesse and Heather, for arranging this, and to the counselors for your ear. We So I think would lean pretty hard on Doug in terms of, I think he's done a great job of providing an overview. I think most of you are familiar from earlier conversations that we've had that the northern part of the site is slated as the new headquarters for VEIC. I'm tempted to call them the Vermont Energy Investment Corp, but they have rebranded themselves and they are just VEIC now. So that's I'm doing my best to stick to that moniker. Their building is a 36,000 foot office building, 3 stories, kind of right on the corner of what we're proposing to be a new public way, which is now kind of the alley behind the CCV building. Their entrance would flow out onto that new street. It has a pretty exciting activation of that corner. I think, from an overall site point of view, one of the things we always, going all the way back to my time platting this project in the first place 20 years ago, the challenge of the site was always trying to provide an interface between sort of the hard urban density that we've got going on Abnaki Way, and then the transition through to Cassavant Park and the 110 acres of open space we protected when we developed this. as a city. And I think we've done a good job of, sort of balancing the reality of what it means to have structured parking in downtown and still maintaining an active streetscape. And that's what I'm most excited about here is I think we've exceeded certainly the thoughts that I had many years ago about what this might look like, by maintaining two really strong urban corners at each end of the site on Abenaki, and providing the kind of connection through to Cassavant Park and really an extension of Winooski Falls Way that most of us had in mind when we put the project together in the first place. Originally, Winooski Falls Way went all the way through the site to the park, and as part of the negotiation for selling the land to the original developers of the site, they wanted the flexibility of connecting all that land together and having some additional capacity for development. And so that was all merged together. But originally, we always saw Winooski Falls Way and that, emphasizing the entry point to that park as being an important part of what we were trying to do there. And so it's cool to see that come back. And I think those are really, the things that come to mind that Doug didn't touch on earlier. So with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions you folks have. Thanks for the chance to be here.
Thanks, Bill and Doug. I have to say, I'm excited to hear you emphasizing this public access to the park. That maybe the current access point is not very, it could be a little nicer. Also, your consideration for activating the street and how this is going to look to folks in Winooski that are, driving, walking, that are in our downtown. I know when we heard, when we saw designs a couple years ago for previous hotel project downtown, that was a big concern that came up from some members of the public, some members of our planning commission at the time. So I'm happy to hear you focusing on that. How I would ask, like, how preliminary are these designs? What do you think, is the next iteration for us to have an understanding of where you're going with this and what we should expect to see for us to be weighing in?
Well, I mean, as would be the case in any situation, let alone the kind of environment we find ourselves in now, projects can always evolve and change. So I don't want to over-represent, but the VEIC building is a full VEIC invested in a full architecture. Gossens Bachman Architects out of Montpelier. Greg Gossens, a principal there. That design that you see is a fully developed conceptual design that the folks at VEIC have signed off on. And in effect, we're permitting that building with the understanding that that's the building we intend to build. And similarly, the hotel design is obviously subject to all of the market realities in terms of whether it physically gets built or not, that Doug has mentioned. But this design is gone quite a ways down the road in terms of being architecturally developed. It isn't by any means a sketch that an architect's done without any thought. It's the result of 4 months worth of work to have the team design something that works. The partners have analyzed it from a feasibility point of view. One thing we haven't talked about is that this design does represent a slightly larger, about 20% larger hotel product than what we had promised to bring the city originally, which I think is a great thing from the standpoint of additional economic activity. We're at 125 keys in this proposal, up from about 100 that we had represented we would have for you in the original deal. That's largely driven by the economics and the realities of our partners in terms of what it takes to support the kind of amenities and high quality things that Doug wanted to see brought to the site.
So, Christine, so I think to directly answer your question about how preliminary are these, and Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, these are the current plans and are not necessarily ready to bid out for construction, but are what right now the building would look like. I do think it's important to note that permitting is part of a financing process. So given the COVID impacts, the financing is really critical obviously financing is always a critical milestone, but it's even a more critical milestone right now. So moving forward through the permitting, so Bill and Doug and their partners can go to banks and say, we have a permit ready project is attractive for them and will make it a more competitive project. So to directly answer your question, I think these are not necessarily preliminary designs. They're early in the bidding process, but this for right now is what the parties buildings are going to look like.
And maybe to answer your question entirely directly, these are the plans that we intend to bring you in substantially this form in June. So they're not evolving to, you're not going to see a different set of drawings in June. There may be some additional detail, but this is effectively the project that we're permitting.
That's helpful. To Heather's point that this is our chance as council to weigh in and say if this design is heading in the direction we would like to see. So it's good to know that I'm really looking at something that's viable here. Are there questions from other members of council? I can't see most of you, so if you want to do raise hand or just go off mute and announce yourself if you have a question.
This is Amy.
Go ahead, Amy.
Sorry, Hal.
That's great.
I would say first that I'm very excited about the plans and have just a lot of things I would like to say about the design, but I will hold that for the next meeting. At one point in the designing process, I think you had mentioned that there was a potential that the hotel could be a net neutral or energy efficient sort of hotel sustained by energy produced at VEIC. Is that still something that you're considering?
Well, VEIC has made a commitment, at least at the design level, if they can prove to afford to do it, to have a net zero, a true net zero certified office building. It's not clear that they'll hit that target entirely, but that's a stated goal of the project. We're going to rely pretty heavily on them for ongoing assistance. But at this point, there are only a couple of hotels in the world that operate at that level of net efficiency, and it's not something that we've targeted for the hotel here.
Okay, thank you.
Haleh, you had a question?
Yes. So you talked about the restaurant space with a deck. Is that a seasonal deck or is that an all year round space?
That would be a seasonal deck.
Okay.
It does have a roof. It does have a roof over it, but I see it as being seasonal.
Got it. Thank you.
I think one thing that isn't entirely clear until we pointed out is that, while we're thinking that the rooftop amenity would be a cool sort of neighborhood thing, we see the space as being a casual dining experience that's going to be open to the public, and it's going to, the design of the hotel is such that it's encouraging people to come in and use it. It's not intended to be an amenity that's reserved for people who are staying there, but rather something that becomes more of a neighborhood hangout and reason for somebody to add another stop to the rotation in terms of the normal places they would go.
Thank you.
So I have heard several times about a need for event space in Winooski. So I'm excited to hear that could be planned as part of that project to open us up as a place where folks could host larger events. I do feel like we discussed in the past some concern about a new restaurant being added to this building in competition with our existing businesses and preventing folks from going out to our existing businesses. I can't exactly remember that discussion or if it's something that we have talked to downtown Winooski about. Amy, is this ringing a bell to you?
I think what I'm remembering is when we were considering different proposals, perhaps, that the ones with the restaurants weren't as favorable. I I feel like from what I had heard from downtown Winooski conversations was that they were primarily excited that VEIC was coming into town because they felt that there were so many employees that would be coming into the downtown and frequenting the restaurants during lunchtime especially. But maybe Heather might remember more clearly.
If I'm recalling correctly, Christine, I believe that what you're thinking of is a former hotel project that we considered on the site pitched it as not being in competition with the existing businesses. So I don't know that that came from the community, but instead came from someone we were working with previously.
You could be
If I
correct.
can,
Heather.
if I can talk a little bit about
Sure.
the restaurant. Can anyone hear me? This is Doug.
Yes, go on, Doug.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So the restaurant is, the scale of this restaurant is probably a 60 to 70 seat restaurant. So just to give you a bar restaurant, to give you a scale, David Abdu's Waterworks, I think, is around 250 seats. So it's not a large bar restaurant we're proposing. It's in about 2,500 square feet. And that has a purpose of serving breakfast for our guests, lunch, and a dinner, and so it has multi-purposes for our guests. But also we are looking to promote it to the community, and but it's not a large driving force for our project. It's more of an amenity for our guests, and I think it's going to be a great place that I would look forward to going up there as a non-guest, just for some food and a drink and a great view of downtown Winooski.
Thank you, Doug. I personally am very excited about a rooftop facility in our city. That's helpful to hear about the scale. I think it is nice to have a community accessible space in here. And that scale certainly fits more than what I pictured in my mind of like a large, thinking of like larger hotels.
Christine,
Jesse.
And I just do want to underline the memory Heather had that the prior developer had pitched not having a restaurant as a non-competition advantage. I think there was actually if I'm remembering that conversation, which I think was around February 2018, that there was a lot of community conversation about that was unfortunate because it's the restaurant that activates that corner and makes that corner of Abenaki Way and Winooski Falls Way really vibrant. That's what I'm remembering. So we can certainly go back through that if you are interested. I haven't heard from the Downtown Association, not Downtown Winooski, but the Downtown Association in the TIF district. They've always been very interested in commercial space, a restaurant at that location as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I have misremembered that discussion. And that certainly I've heard much more enthusiasm for the patrons that a hotel and this office space will bring to our downtown as a huge benefit. Are there other questions from council?
Mayor, I don't really actually have a question. I just want to say that I want to go on the record being really pleased with what was shown. I think both in the visuals and as well as the landscaping plan, I think this looks like a really exciting project.
Thank you, Jim. Are there questions or comments from members of the public? I'm not hearing any. I will echo your sentiments, Jim. Having seen previous iterations of designs for hotel projects in downtown, I do like what I'm seeing here as compared to things that have come from the past. And like I said, concern for that public access and how the public will interact with this is certainly important. Are there specific points, like questions you have for us or specific pieces of design that you would like us to weigh in on, or have you heard enough to be useful this evening?
We really just appreciate the opportunity to bring it to you, and we see this as a iterative process since we're working with staff almost daily. So please don't hesitate to any thoughts, ideas, improvements you have. We'd love to hear from you before June so we can incorporate whatever thoughts you might have in advance.
On that note, Amy, did you have some specifics you wanted to get into?
No, mostly what I was going to say are just points of praise. I like the design so far. And, there were certain things like the fact that the parking isn't hidden. I really appreciated that design element because the other garage, there's such a struggle for people to find it. So just little things like that. But I think I can save the rest of the comments for the next meeting.
Any further questions or comments on this item? This is just for discussion. There will be no vote attached to this. All right, well, Doug and Bill, thank you again for taking the time to walk through this with us. We are looking forward to seeing progression here.
We appreciate the
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.
And thank you to staff for continuing to work diligently on this project.
That Heather is really the one who should get the credit for that. She has been coordinating with Bill and Doug, as Bill said, daily on this. So kudos to Heather for her moving this forward.
Thank you. We will move on to our next item, which Heather is also introducing. This is item D for discussion, Wayfinding Plan presentation.
So once again, this is something that we've been working on for quite a while. In December of 2018, we secured a municipal planning grant award in the amount of $22,000, which we are matching with, I believe it's $3,300 on the city side, for the purpose of hiring a consultant to develop a wayfinding plan. After an RFP process, we hired Landworks as the consultant firm in spring of 2019. And over the last year, staff have been working with the consultant team to develop a draft wayfinding plan that has included multiple opportunities for public input and stakeholder feedback, and that feedback has been incorporated into the plan. So you have received a draft of the presentation that you'll be seeing tonight. And I have David Raphael, who's the principal of Landworks, with us this evening. He's going to give you kind of a real quick overview of the wayfinding plan as it stands right now. And I just want to remind you that we have applied for funding for fabrication and implementation of the results of this project. We do have an award from last year from the Downtown Transportation Fund of $10,000. And we have also put some funds into the 2021 budget. So and then lastly, I've applied for another Downtown Transportation Fund grant, and we are waiting to hear back on that. So they should be considering that over the next week or two, and I will let you know as soon as I know more about that. So with that, I'm going to ask you, Jesse, to please pull up David's presentation for him, and I'm going to turn it over to you, David Raphael.
Thank you, Heather. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Just before I start, it's been a pleasure to work with Heather and her associates. And as Heather said, we've been working over the last year to develop this and have been on the ground and had several meetings. So what you'll see is sort of an initial overview of our work and the initial charge, and then some examples of, the example of the so-called wayfinding family that we've developed, and then a glimpse at sort of the final product that the city will be getting from us by the end of the month. And just again, in terms of background, Landworks has been in business for probably 32, 33 years. Wayfinding and graphic design has been one of our areas of focus. You just have to look across the river at both the university and the city of Burlington to see our work if you have any interest in some of our credentials. Those wayfinding systems have been in place, as you probably know, for quite some time. In fact, I began work in Burlington, if you can believe it, in the mid-90s with the project. And just about 2 years ago, the city undertook almost $250,000 rehabilitation and enhancement of the system. So without further ado, first slide is, thank you, Jesse, for putting that up. This is directly taken from the RFP, which is what has been our guiding charge for the project, focusing on points of interest, parking and public amenities, and providing a welcome to the city. Next slide, please. The wayfinding system provides for what we call a hierarchy of sign elements. So you'll see there's sort of families of different types of signs that serve different purposes. But the overall goal is to make the city more accessible, more visible, and easier to navigate for both residents and visitors. Next slide, please. So there are a number of elements of wayfinding. It's always important to stress that wayfinding isn't just about signs. It's about other elements. One of the things we discovered, for example, at the university when we started was that people navigated through the campus by locating the water tower and using that as sort of a guiding landmark to find their way. Banners, interpretive signs, even regulatory signs are all part of the information framework within which people enjoy, navigate, get to, and appreciate a city's resources and assets. Next slide, please. So the timeline here that we've been following is fairly straightforward. We're now obviously in the spring of 2020. Tonight we're presenting to you, and thank you for that opportunity. We are currently knee-deep in developing the specifications for fabrication. We'll also be providing a cost estimate, and you'll see from the following slides that we also provide sign messaging and sign locations as part of the overall package for the project. Next slide, please. So we had a number of takeaways from our analysis phase in which we interviewed a number of people, spent time on the ground, worked with Heather. And right at the top of the list was getting people to the parking garage and to the parking facilities in town. Secondly, certainly the need to let people know you've arrived and that you're here in Winooski and that you're welcome, and then to guide people from that point to their destinations. We realize that the Rotary is a very important part of the downtown, and there's some, obviously a longer term effort to kind of flip the impression of the Rotary. I think that's sort of successfully underway at this point, and ultimately signing around the Rotary to guide travelers more safely and quickly to their destination will be part of that. Next slide, please. As part of the work I did, took a look at the whole city, and I called this sort of the geography of wayfinding. What does the city look like on the ground and conceptually, and how do we respond to that with an overall system that addresses the diversity and the destinations and the amenities of the city. Next slide, please. Continuing with the takeaways, we realized that one of the important pieces in the process was to get people to locations like the parks and recreation facilities, and that need certainly emerged again with the recent master planning work done in the city focused on the park system. We also recognize that it's a growing and diverse community, and there is a need to address language barriers. We have primarily been incorporating universal symbols into the signs, and you'll see that. We have not shown multilingual messaging. There are many languages being spoken in Winooski right now, so that might be difficult to do, but certainly that possibility still exists. Next point was, we realized that there's a proliferation of signs throughout the downtown and the city, and I think one of the hopes is, as a new system goes into place, we can reduce the signs in the city that might be redundant, or relocate them or co-locate them. Again, using a local reference, when we did the university sign system, our goal was for every sign that we put up, we took one down, and we succeeded in that, and then some. So hopefully that'll be the case in Winooski. Next slide, please. We obviously built around and used as our point of departure the sort of the brand and the logo that has been developed for the city, and that is being incorporated through the sign system through colors and graphic references, which includes some of these types of images coming right from some of the work that's been done. Next slide, please. And ultimately, we've also set up the opportunity for the backs of some of the signs, or all of them ultimately, to have some sort of artwork or reference to the city's history and diversity, to provide interest to users, obviously not to complicate or undermine any safety in terms of reading the signs. So these would be on the back sides. And we've set that up so that can happen. And there are sources of funding specifically for this type of activity, which hopefully the city will pursue in the future. Next slide, please. You can go to the next one. Thank you. So here's the first slide showing the wayfinding family based on the vehicular destinations. The vehicular signs that will lead people to their destinations. So you can get a feel for the look and feel. Each of the vehicular large-scale signs will have the Winooski logo, but you can see that we're going to carry through the process and the products a consistent sign system, consistent typography, large enough to read from a distance, and using reflective lettering, so this works well at night. Again, example of standard symbols that be incorporated throughout would be the parking image, which is consistent with what's in the city today. We also are showing a smaller scale sign for neighborhood locations. Certainly noticed as we navigated around the city, there needed to be confirmatory signs to get you, to example, to Landry Park. And yet we didn't want to place, these larger scale signs on the left. So we've come up with a smaller version that can be used in neighborhood settings as a sort of secondary and confirmatory type sign. Next slide, please. This is the pedestrian system on the left. So there's going to be a series of pedestrian directionals, which I think will really enliven the downtown and help people, get to all the wonderful amenities and the Riverwalk and things of that nature in the city core. And on the left is some examples of the symbol system that will be incorporated into that messaging. And then on the right, we have designed, probably for a second phase of the project, a kiosk that's sort of based on both historic and modern references. I kind of took the idea for the half circle at the top of the kiosk directly off the top of the facade of the Winooski block. Next slide, please. The other key element, as you may recall in the introduction, were the welcomes to Winooski. And we've come up with two different designs which can be used in the city that will have some connectivity. One on the left are what I'm calling sort of banner poles or posts that will hold banners that can be changed over time. I think the one subtle difference here is we're not necessarily proposing, although they could be used, easily fabric banners, but more sort of panels that will be a little bit more rigid and will hold color well and could work over longer times. But again, these panels will be readily replaceable or substituted with newer graphics and other panels that the city may choose to create with local artists or in a second phase in the project. On the right is something that I think is going to be pretty cool. It's sort of an industrial type grid work design that we'll be able to place different messaging and graphic symbols onto and take off over time as sees fit. We can announce events on these kinds of panels, but also include local references like this gear, which you can see under the Winooski name, that is taken directly from a photograph that Miriam Block provided of the mills in Winooski. That's a part of a weaving machine. And then obviously here's an opportunity to use different languages that could be changeable or added on sort of this welcome feature. And we sort of see these on both sides of the road. They would be internally lit with LED lighting. and fairly low key and pretty simple to construct, actually. Next slide, please. And finally, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we want to get people to the parking garage quickly and easily. But once in the parking garage, we want to make it perhaps a more pleasant experience. So we've identified a more or less off-the-shelf system that we can then incorporate our own color system and typography, again, to unify it with the whole system throughout the city, and to bring a little bit more life and color into the parking garage. And possibly with some super graphics in terms of numbers, and building on some of the artwork that's already in the garage. Next slide, please. A couple of other signs we looked at just to sort of show how this might work throughout the city with different types of signs. Here's an example of a park entry sign, again, using same typography and colors, except that in this instance, we introduced the green from the logo to again connote recreation for sort of information panels below the primary sign. Next slide, please. And then just an example of how this system could translate into, citywide identification signage. This could be a new sign that goes on to the City Hall building itself that again derives from the logo, typeface, and the color scheme that we've been using throughout the proposed wayfinding system. Next slide, please. Project implementation. One example we provided in terms of a visual simulation so that we could see and you could see what a typical vehicular directional sign will look like on the street itself in terms of size and scale. This is a good example of that we simulated right onto the streetscape. Next slide, please. Now I'm kind of showing you, these are what the detailed sign package is going to look like. We are preparing what we are calling the Winooski, wayfinding sign and information manual, and it will have all the details and specifications that the city can build from. Our understanding is that the city Public Works will be doing the installation in most instances. Regardless of that fact, we've provided full construction details that the city can use. I have talked with Public Works and John, so we are on the same page about this. And hopefully what we give you as a final product will be an easy next step to provide in a competitive bidding process to potential fabricators and sign contractors so that various components of the project can be readily constructed. Next slide, please. Again, another example of the level of detail we'll be providing for the different sign components. Next slide, please. And then this is an example, one of the, we're actually going to have a map, a line drawing map, but this diagram was presented in our last presentation to show how somebody coming into Winooski from the interstate would see a consistent set of signs to get them to their ultimate destination, which would be the downtown parking garage. And so what you're seeing on this plan are the signs and elements that would do that in, we believe, an effective, consistent, and safe manner. Next slide, please. And then the other part of the product that goes with the mapping is what we call our sign schedule. It's a matrix which lists all the signs, the messaging, potential location, arrows, so forth and so on, so the city can work from this. This will be, again, provided to the city electronically so that it can be changed and revised over time to reflect city needs and new developments. Next slide, please. And now we're at that final stage, and our next step, hopefully within the next week or two, is to provide the draft Winooski sign and wayfinding plan and manual for internal review and comment by Heather and other staff members. I will be providing a memorandum on estimated component costs, recommended phasing and funding. Of course, phasing is going to be based on the funding that's available and the priority for the signage. I think the highest priority is to get the vehicular directionals probably in place in part, and then perhaps going to the pedestrian system. And then number 3 will be any refinements, corrections, or additions once city staff has had a chance to review it. And then obviously we deliver the final plan and manual and are complete with the project. Next slide, please. So, again, in summary, I think the city from our work has very compelling and distinct resources and assets to sustain and benefit from a coordinated public information system. There's a reason why towns and cities all over Vermont, all over New England, all over the country have implemented or are implementing wayfinding programs. I've worked elsewhere in New England and actually out west doing this type of work in resort recreational communities as well as historic downtowns like Winooski. And ultimately, we believe, and I've seen it on the ground, how these types of projects enhance the quality of life, travel safety and experience, and the economic vitality in the downtown. And now my presentation is done, and I'm certainly hoping to hear any questions or comments you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We have certainly heard that there are struggles for locating the garage, locating some of our parks. So I'm excited to see, some maps provided here. I'm looking forward to seeing the recommended phasing in the future. Obviously, there's some attractive design here. Heather, is there any like specific feedback or anything you're looking for now, or is this just our chance to take a look and ask some questions?
I mean, I think I'd like to hear whether you think we've gone in the correct direction here. I want to say up front that because it was driven by the new branding, we really were specific about what we wanted them to be doing. So maybe some of the graphic fun that might be usually entailed in a project like this wasn't so much available because we had already done the rebrand and said, here's the photography, here's the seal, here are the colors. But overall, are there any concerns that you have? Is there anything that you feel that we're missing? Is there something we should be looking at further?
Hal, I see you have your hand.
Yes. So David, thank you for the presentation. I think it's great. Winooski is the most diverse city in northern New England. And we have many, many different cultures who make this place our home, and I'm very proud to live here. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the welcome signage, is there any way to convey that notion that we are a very rich, diverse city?
Well, yes, I do think so. And again, that may be in a second phase, but in the initial phase, our thinking was, and we had some earlier slides in a previous presentation which alluded to this, that on that kind of gateway sign structure, you could put a welcome in any number of different languages that reflect the city's population. And we feel that might be a good way to kind of set that sense of place in motion and really celebrate the diversity of the city. So, through the banners and the welcome, I think the potential definitely exists there. And then again, as I said earlier, even on the backs of the signs, there's an opportunity there potentially to have local artists from different components of the city and neighborhoods to provide graphics that would enliven the sign system.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Amy, were you going to speak?
Yes, thank you. I had a similar comment to what Hal was going to say about the multiple languages being offered. So thank you for clarifying that piece. 2 questions. I'm curious what the life expectancy is of some of these signs. How long essentially they'll last us before we'll need to update them again. And also curious if we, this is probably out of the budget, but if we considered or looked into digital signage at all, especially for the kiosk.
All good questions. So in terms of sort of long-term maintenance and sort of sustainability, if you will, we have specified not only paints and finishes that are designed, to really withstand the rigors of weather and use in northern New England, but my experience with this type of signage, for example, the Burlington City signs, which were originally put up, again in the mid '90s, really lasted quite some time, and actually technology's improved dramatically in terms of the lettering that is often used, which tends to be an applied type of lettering. So these signs will last, regardless of potential vandalism. I mean, that's the only thing we can't control, for 10 to 20 years easily, depending, on, again, the materials are being used and so forth and so on. But, maybe, again, a kiosk might have a little bit more use and might need to be refinished. But generally speaking, we're using very sturdy materials, paints, either powder coating or what's called acrylic polyurethane sign paints to paint the panels, which are very long-lived. And our sense of this is that once up, the maintenance challenges are not great. Really, what happens is there's a need to change messaging, and so you need to kind of add to or replace some of the messaging as naming changes or new developments occur. We did not have it in our budget to design what the kiosk content would look like. We provided a space for panels and panels on both sides. We have done some digital signing. There are challenges with that in terms of weather and operation and maintenance. So that's a whole nother level, actually, of involvement and cost. Not that it can't happen, but it is a whole nother enterprise to undertake that type of signing. We've had some experience with that, and our experience tells us that a city needs to be prepared to take that on and manage it, and have the funding to do so. In the absence of that, excuse me, we have found that, for example, for a kiosk, you can come up with very simple changeable messaging systems with panels that you can slide in and out as new businesses come and go. If you ever go to Saratoga Springs, we have put in place a kiosk system that we designed that provides just that type of facility, so that as new businesses come and go, they get an entry in the bottom of the panel, which is called a directory, and then it's keyed to a map of the downtown that locates the business or the destination on that map. And then typically on the backside, as we did in Saratoga Springs, you have an opportunity for an interpretive panel, artwork, to get back to Hal's question and to respond to yours. That could be another wonderful opportunity to celebrate the diversity of the city.
Great, thank you. I think, digital, I'm sure it does have its challenges, and I'm sure it is very expensive. One of the reasons I brought it up is because I think about the signage that we put in front of the Rotary near the farmers market to display events, and the challenge that comes with hanging up those banners. They're on a steel structure, you have to hang them up with grommets. If it's really windy, they get blown over. So if we ever have the budget to do something along those lines, I would definitely be in favor of that, specifically to promote events.
Sure, that makes sense.
Other questions or comments from council? Any questions or comments from members of the public? Not seeing any. I will just add one more thought, Amy, to your question about longevity. I noticed our logo on a lot of these signs, which I think does look good, but considering we did just go through a rebranding and updating that logo, I would wonder about the cost of including that when it's something that could potentially need to be changed before these signs outlive themselves.
That's a good question. So the logo would be applied to the sign either as a separate add-on panel or as a vinyl type of graphic that's already silk screened and sealed. They can be removed. It's not easy, but you could remove it, repaint or touch up the back panel, and then apply a new logo or a new image if you wanted. If that was a critical issue, again, as I mentioned, the logo could be, and we provided a note in our design to this effect, could be on a separate panel that can be applied, either screwed in or adhered to that top semicircle on the panel, allowing it to be removed readily if it needed to be.
It's good to know there are updating options for the content.
Sure.
Heather, is there anything else that you would like to hear about specifically?
No, I think that covers it overall. And I just want to say thank you to David. He's been really, really conscious about cost. So he's had a lot of really great ideas that I've said, no, we can't afford that. That's outside the budget. So, I think he's really very rigorously looked at this and understood that one of the things that we need as a community is functional signage that we'll be able to utilize for a long time. And so he's really looked at it being able to withstand wear and tear and be as affordable as possible for our community. So I just want to take a minute to say thank you to David for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I like those considerations. And looking forward to seeing the recommended phasing and prioritization in the future iteration of this. So thank you again for coming to present to us, David.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate your comments. And I would just say that if you have a chance, if you're looking through the presentation again and you have further questions, I'm sure Heather can field them and pass them along to us. Great. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
We will move to our next agenda item. This is item E for approval, Justice Assistance Grant, COVID-19 funding, and Chief Hebert will introduce this to us.
Mayor, members of the council, good evening. It's nice to see you all, even if it is remotely. I'd like to start out tonight. What's in front of you is the FY20 Bureau of Justice Assistance COVID-19 JAG Emergency Supplemental Funding Award. Since we haven't taken any JAG money in 3 fiscal years, I'd just like to do a little historical background on what that is for newer members of the council. Historically, the Justice Assistance Grant has awarded money on an annual basis to states using a formula that takes into consideration both population and crime statistics. Applying that formula and using those statistics, if a municipality reaches an award of $10,000 or more, the city becomes a direct recipient and is allowed to directly apply for the grant funds. This particular grant was put together as part of a COVID-19 federal stimulus package to assist state and local law enforcement with meeting both short-term and long-term needs to address new law enforcement concerns for dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, the Bureau of Justice Assistance has acknowledged that because the need for additional resources is needed in a timely manner, that the current local sanctuary city policies and certifications will be waived and are not a consideration for this particular grant. In an effort to get the money to municipalities in days and not months. The average application is approved within 3 days of submittal. The Winooski Police Department will utilize the COVID-19 Justice Assistant Grant to pay for the cost of adding safety equipment, specifically personal protection equipment, technology, and remote training opportunities due to the immediate and long-term budgetary and social distancing limitations of the virus that require new ongoing and mobile solutions. The grant allows for the various purchase of items to assist with new workplace safety, equipment, training, and a wide array of other operational costs. These purchases will provide relief for short-term needs and also allow the city of Winooski to strengthen resources as a countywide partner in the event local dispatch centers need assistance during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'll get into that in more detail in a moment. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay. The actual award is for $33,392. I also plan on using one of my line items from my FY20 budget for the other equipment and maintenance for $1,693.07. That brings the total of the project to just over $35,000 with a cost of $1,693 to the city. The first part of the application I'd like to discuss is what's called a dispatch in a box. The dispatch in a box includes a number of components that will allow the Winooski Police Department to have the capability of having a mobile dispatch center. When the need arises, a completely portable radio system in conjunction with a secure router, a mobile command cellular telephone system, and a mobile laptop to set up a working dispatch center at an alternate location within minutes. The need for this type of system is essential in the event the building needs to be decontaminated, evacuated, for any other reason due to COVID-19 or something else unforeseen. Or in the event that dispatch staff becomes ill and has to self-quarantine, we would need to activate mutual aid and ask one of our law enforcement partners to take over dispatching duties, either from their location or using the mobile dispatch center until our employees can come to work. So at the local level, the chiefs have identified we're not alone in this particular need. This was on the wish list of many chiefs within the county, and nobody ever really felt comfortable coming and asking their city councils. This is a big piece of regional policing and mutual aid. Everybody has different pieces. Very few have them all. This will actually complete the package for us. So included in this package is also a digital interface program that we've already added to the dispatch center. So if for some reason 3 of my dispatchers were diagnosed with COVID-19 and had to self-quarantine and we couldn't function anymore, Colchester is absolutely ready and willing to be our backup center, a flip of a switch for the telephone lines, and they could be up and running in minutes. And vice versa for us here, if they happened to need the assistance, we are their backup. We've also set up a redundancy plan for the Essex Police Department to be the second backup if both of us go down. So we're feeling pretty good about, by adding these pieces to the countywide dispatch puzzle, that we're solving a lot of problems here. And even if regional dispatch does come into play, all of this equipment is available to use and transfer over to the regional center to help reduce our cost to actually join that program. So even if things change and dispatching isn't in Winooski, this equipment is still very valuable. The second part of the grant is for mobile computers to be installed in the unmarked police vehicles. The Winooski Police Department currently has mobile computers installed in all 4 marked police vehicles. The grant funds will be used to purchase 3 additional patrol PC systems to be installed in the department's unmarked vehicles that will allow all WPD employees to have the ability to work remotely from a vehicle and ensure social distancing protocols can be safely followed and performing essential law enforcement functions while out in the field. The patrol PCs will give officers access to all of our normal criminal justice systems that are accessible within the police department. Officers will also have the ability to complete online training from their vehicle if they choose to do so. All mobile computers have the required security systems installed to prevent any unauthorized access. The third part of the grant covers what's called the Police One Academy. Vermont certified police officers are required to attend 30 hours of in-service training per calendar year to maintain their certification. One of the effects of COVID-19 are all in-person training opportunities have been canceled and continue to be postponed due to the virus. Police One Academy is an accredited online portal that is recognized by the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council as a viable online option for officers to complete their annual training hours. A 1-year subscription to the portal will be purchased for every officer. Officers will have the ability to complete their courses based on their availability and from any computer with internet access. The fourth and final part of the grant is for the personal protection equipment. The COVID-19 virus has required the Winooski Police Department to purchase several items to keep employees safe. Ongoing purchases of items will be needed to replenish current supplies in order to continue to provide a germ-free and safe work environment within the police department and for employees in the field. Items are included but not limited to face coverings and cloth masks, Clorox wipes, no-touch thermometers, and nitrile gloves. And that can change. Obviously, we can add or subtract as we go along and as needs change. The actual totals for this grant, the dispatch in a box comes out to $12,822.06, and that includes the digital plugin that we've already added to the dispatch center in order to be Colchester's backup. $19,291 for the 3 patrol PCs complete with their mounting systems. $1,884 for the Police One Academy 1-year subscription, and $1,027.52 of personal protection equipment for a grand total of $35,085.07. That's all I have.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate you layering in about regional dispatch and how this all has, how this plays out together. That was certainly something I was thinking about. I did want to ask, so one of the items was to add PCs to unmarked cars that we already have in our marked vehicles. Is there a reason we don't already have those? Like why those vehicles don't have the same setup as the other vehicles already?
Cost. I came to the council, I think it was in FY17 for the Surface Pros for the marked cars. Those replaced severely outdated Panasonic Toughbooks that were approximately 10 years old. And to be honest, the Surface Pros were an experiment. We were going to something new, and when you try something new, you go to these trade shows and you look at everything and all the options that are available. At the time, I had to come to council for reserve balance money to actually get those. So I wanted all of the marked vehicles to have the PCs, but it was kind of a wish list to have the unmarked vehicles also have them at that time.
Okay, I was just curious. I also noticed in this document, there is mention of a public hearing, like this being a public hearing, I guess. Mm-hmm. We didn't like warn this, right? I'm curious what that's about. Might be a Jesse question.
So we did not warn it as a public hearing. Often grant requirements are called a different thing. If usually they want to know that the elected officials have approved the grant requirement and the public has been given an opportunity to weigh in. For our uses, having it on a council agenda meets that requirement. We will see if the DOJ pushes it back as not an officially warned public hearing.
They've always accepted it in the past as a public hearing.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. And I do understand this is moving rapidly to get these funds in place. Are there questions from other members of council? Members of the public? Hearing no further comments, I would entertain a motion to approve this grant request.
So moved.
Motion by Jim, second by Amy. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Go forth with your application, please, Chief.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And you will be staying with us for our next item F, also for discussion about Community Justice Center discontinuation of state funding.
Yes, he's not actually allowed to go anywhere at the moment. Something's flying over. So this is a pretty sad agenda item for the chief and I to be bringing to you. I provided you some historic communication between the city and the Department of Corrections in the last couple of months for you to consider, but just a few paragraphs of history here. So the city has received a Department of Corrections grant to provide restorative justice practices for many years. Our grant is expiring on June 30th. Certainly since I've been with Winooski, there have been ongoing conversations with Department of Corrections around efficiencies within the system. Chittenden County has 5, or 2, as of this moment, has 5 community justice centers. I think the next highest county is Washington County with 2. So they got a lot of pushback about the amount of resources going into Chittenden County. So we have been working with the CJC directors and managers in those other communities to think about efficiencies for many years. As you all know, in March, Eli, our CJC director, left employment with the city. With that change in employees, the chief and I went to Department of Corrections and said, here is an opportunity for us to partner with another community. Here's how we would like to do it through an MOU process. You can see that outlined in that early April letter. They came back to us and said, we can't force another community to partner with you. And in fact, we don't need it because any Winooski business can be provided by any other CJC and other communities. Input into another community's way they do services isn't something that DOC supports. So at that point, the chief and I became concerned that we were really, this service delivery system that we had built up and used throughout our organization was going to be very eroded very quickly. So we went back and said, okay, we'll keep our grant. We'll continue as we have our commitment to restorative practices. We got an award from the Dismiss House for that last year. And DOJ or DOC came back to us and said, okay, well, we're going to reduce your grant funding by 54%. So going from $130,000 a year grant to about a $60,000 a year grant. The chief and I talked about it at length. We really don't feel like responsibly we can staff both COSAs and restorative panels for that amount of money, and it would be irresponsible to present to you all and the state that we could do that. So my recommendation to you is that we discontinue our grant relationship with the Department of Corrections. This will be for the DOC, Rick, correct me on these numbers, but about with the $50,000 in lag money we have this year and the additional 70 that they will save from us next year, whatever that math is, $120,000 of savings to the state, I would argue, on the backs of Winooski residents, which is extraordinarily sad to us. All we are recommending is that we cannot responsibly staff at this level. What my understanding from the Department of Corrections, as we've gone through all these conversations, is that what they plan to do when they discontinue our grant is add a part-time staff person to make a full-time staff, to take an existing part-time staff person in Essex, make that staff person a full-time staff person, which is great, what we want to do as a region, and have that person provide COSA services to folks being referred from Winooski. Burlington, so DOC has also asked Burlington to provide restorative panel support to Winooski referrals, and are not offering them any new money to do that. Believe that they can do that within their existing grant funds. The chief and I have had conversations with the Burlington team and the Essex team. While I do not think it is the best way to provide services for Winooski residents, I think through this, the chief and I have been able to maintain good relationships with those two entities. And, we will try our best to positively impact how they provide services, but ultimately it will be DOC's call and those communities' calls. As I said, I think this is a really sad state of affairs for services in our community, but I don't think we can responsibly recommend any other course of action at this point. Rick, did I miss anything significant there?
No, I just kind of wanted to express to the mayor and the council that although on the outside looking in, this is a sad day, I remain very optimistic about this. I've put a lot of thought into it. Jesse has too over the past few months. I have all the faith in the world in our restorative partners that surround us, that they're going to continue to provide a good service. They have all reassured us that they're going to keep the police department and any other city departments that it touches involved in conversations. I think there's still opportunities for police officers to be involved with the COSAs by possibly sitting and volunteering in the COSA circles. And one of the things that's exciting to me, and it was a frustration for a long time, but now it's exciting. The frustration was for the past 4 years, I've had conversations with DOC about how they don't reward us for all of the good work that the Winooski District, the Community Services Department, the Police Department does with at-risk youth within the city. And we're almost I feel that we're being penalized by our good work. Our numbers have gone down every year consistently. And my response was, great, they should. If we're doing our job, we should work ourselves out of a job. And although philosophically DOC agrees with us, that money is divided between the towns and the CJCs based on numbers. And our numbers were continuously going down, which wasn't a good sign for them. Then you add on top of that, Eli resigning, and our position was already vacant because there was some questions during the fiscal year whether we could fund that. So now we were literally just looking at touching our one-time part-time employee within the CJC, which started the regional conversations. Why I say I'm excited is I think the restorative justice panels were always step number one in this process in years past. What we are devising is a really innovative plan that other communities are going to look at eventually and try and add for services. I can't speak too much about it yet because we don't have a job description, but what I will tell you, it's all about prevention and education. It's everything that the city of Winooski values at the school district, within the police department and the community services department, and as a community as a whole. And we're going to be able to use that $13,000 in change that we were using for the restorative panels to, in my mind, now add a new step one where restorative will be step two. So I think it's actually an opportunity for us to strengthen services within the city. The only thing we're going to lose is a little bit of local control.
So Hal has his hand raised, but just just underline a few points. One, I just need to point out, there are very few police chiefs that I've ever worked with who are basically optimistic. And I feel like Chief Hebert is such an optimist, and I love it. And I think our community is so well served for that perspective. But so he is specifically calling out just as a reminder to the council, in the CJC fund budget, the vast majority of the $130,000 came as grant money from the state. And then there is $13,000 in the general fund that is our match that we use to pay the salary of the panel manager. We are keeping that $13,000. That doesn't travel to Essex or to Burlington. So the chief and Ray and I and Phoebe are working on how we are going to reallocate those dollars specifically to better support youth in the city and support them from a restorative foundation. So in the next couple of, hopefully at the next council meeting or certainly in June, we will bring you a job description for that position. Thanks, Chief.
Hal?
Okay. Thanks, Chief. I guess my question is, with this new structure, will the restorative panels rely on local volunteers to do the work that has been done before?
We're literally working on a transition plan right now, and we're in the very early stages, but the conversation from day one has always been that our volunteers and the panels will still remain in Winooski and available to Winooski residents.
Okay, thanks.
And one of the things that the chief and I were very adamant about in our negotiations were the specific experience of the professionals with cultural competency, unconscious bias training, language abilities. And we had some concerns about how that may trickle out in other departments or other communities. Burlington was our preference. We wanted to partner entirely with Burlington, specifically because many of our neighbors kind of go back and forth between those communities, and the Burlington CJ department has extraordinary expertise in that. So they, under this model right now, they will be providing those panels. And Rachel Jolly, if folks know her, she's the CJC director there, as the chief said, has committed to keeping those panels and those volunteers local in Winooski.
Great.
That's really good news. That was a concern that I had, especially given transportation challenges. I do want to acknowledge the level of effort that you all have gone to trying to make this work and trying to find creative solutions, even as the DOC has been aiming towards removing funding. And also really appreciate, Chief, how you are looking towards what the next step is and how to keep moving forward with prevention and restoration processes, despite this being a kind of a disappointing update. Questions from other members of council? Any questions from the public? So there's no vote needed here. This was a discussion item. If there is if you have anything else to share, staff, please do. But it sounds like we don't have any additional questions here.
Yeah, there's not necessarily a vote for you to take on this. What we would be bringing you typically, well, I might want to ask Angela, what we would be bringing you typically is the CJC FY21 budget for approval, but basically that budget is now zeroed out. Angela, do you recommend that we actually bring that to them zeroed out, or do they need to vote on that?
We should probably bring a budget adjustment, zeroing everything out, if that's what we intend to do at a future meeting. It doesn't have to happen quickly, just before the end of FY21. So we got like a whole year.
Okay. Thank you. We will bring that.
Thank you. Also looking forward to the future recommendation on the $13,000. So this brings us to item G, Introduction, Chapter 28 Fee Update.
Thanks. So this actually hopefully will be a very quick item. You periodically update the fee chapter of the Code of Ordinances. This update primarily is the FY21 update. So it's all of the revenue assumptions we made in the FY21 budget, codifying those into the ordinance. So those are the majority of the updates. There are a few other cleanup items in there that we are happy to talk about. And we have significantly updated our itinerant vendor fee, since that was very outdated. We are solely introducing this tonight. We would ask you to schedule a public hearing for June 1st to get some of the public hearings off of June 15th, and also to get this in place for FY21.
Am I mistaken? I think we looked at these during the budgeting process, or were not all of them included?
You looked at all of them during the budget process from a budgetary perspective, but we didn't actually update the ordinance.
Right, okay. Questions from council? Jim?
So the only question I had on the industrial wastewater permit is, it says set time to time. Is that sufficient, or I'm just curious if we need to provide any more bounding and what time to time means? Is it semi-annually or semi-decadally, or just curious what the thought was there?
So the thought there was, you set the water and wastewater rates as part of the budget process. The industrial wastewater rate, and I don't see Russia on here anymore, but that is a formula that is based on science of what's going to the wastewater treatment plant, not something that would necessarily change on an annual basis. So I think it would be updated with, new requirements at the treatment plant or new science or things like that, but not on an annual basis. So time to time actually means less frequently than on a prescribed schedule.
Great, thanks.
Other questions? Questions from the public? I'm not sure we have public attendance. So are you looking for us to schedule a hearing at this time, or would that be in a future?
I would like you to take a vote to schedule a public hearing for June 1st.
Would anyone like to make a motion to set a public hearing for June 1st for the Chapter 28 fee update?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Hal, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. More public hearing. Thank you, Jesse. Item H for discussion, a goal update on safe, healthy, connected people with Ray and both of our chiefs.
I think I drew the short straw on the not only the COVID haircut, but also presenting this. So my daughter did this.
Commend her on her.
I wanted, yeah, I'll give her a shout out. So I definitely, we're really glad to be presenting this. Obviously this has been a really strange quarter to look back on. And I think especially for us in the fields that do a lot of direct work with humans, this has been a weird time. Certainly for John and Rick, I think, I'm lagging. Am I good? Okay. John and Rick, certainly I think I've seen upticks in certain areas of their work. We've seen quite the opposite as we haven't been able to get people together. But, I think reflecting back on what we have done and the ways we've adjusted was really positive and feels good. So we wanted to present this, see if there's any specific questions, but I think a lot of it hopefully is pretty straightforward and speaks for itself.
Thank you, Ray.
Yeah.
Looking at this, I appreciate that you have denoted where the pandemic has been a part of the delay, and a lot of those items make sense. There's some other stuff in here like regional dispatch. We know that is still delayed. That's a broader thing that's outside of our complete control. So there's nothing on here that was particularly surprising to me. I do want to call out as a positive the community center building being fully leased out as something that has been a bit of a challenge in the past. And to your point, Ray, that there is still some forward motion here despite the challenges that we're facing. Do members of council have any questions about this update? Jim.
Yeah, thanks for the update, Ray, and for identifying kind of where COVID is really integrating into the problems that are being faced. I was just curious if you could say a little bit more about the census participation and kind of what expectations might be. I mean, this seems like a wide range between Vermont and Chittenden County, and we're right at the national average. Do you expect that we will see higher participation rates going forward as things restart, or just kind of what you're thinking on that?
I mean, certainly that's the hope. I think one challenge that we have run up against for a lot of our non-English speaking residents is that a lot of the resources that have been going into the translation and interpretation world have been really focused on the COVID response. And so I think a lot of things have fallen onto a back burner, including census. So I do think there's some work coming with AALV and USCRI around connecting with some of our new American residents. I think the ground game has been really limited too. And so I think for anybody here that has limitations around technology access, which is, a decent portion of our community, that's been challenging as well. So I'm thinking of senior living facilities in particular, where there's large numbers of folks, many of whom don't have as ready access to technology. So I think as some of those in-person pieces start to come back, we'll see those numbers go up. And, you know, we're certainly hoping to be able to be more supportive, even as it relates to sort of street signage and, you know, getting the word out. We've really tried to scale back, especially early in the response, a lot of communications that weren't. In fact, I'd met, I think, 4 days before we shut everything down with Bob Stock, who's kind of our primary contact point with the census, and talked about getting a bunch of street signs and, you know, plans for advertising and going out. And then 4 days later, the world sort of turned on its head. So I think we will see numbers improve. It's hard to predict kind of what our percentage will be and how that relates to, you know, national and county averages. But, you know, I'm pleased to see where we are. And I think we're seeing also when we do a push through social media, we're seeing a growth in the numbers of responses. So that's something too, I think we'll do more of.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments? Any public comments? All right, well, thank you for presenting, Ray, and thank you all for putting together this update memo to keep us in the loop. We will move on to item I for discussion, 2019-2020 policy priorities and strategies report out and 2020 planning.
Great, thanks. This is really meant to be just a quick introduction tonight and to get guidance on how you would like to move forward, not a complete review of everything. So as you know, since 2017, we have in this time of year in May and June come together as a council and leadership team to set annual priorities. This year, because of the uncertainty we are facing with COVID, both because of reduced staffing levels, financial uncertainty around what our community is going to need and prioritize, we as a leadership team are recommending that we do essentially an interim plan, a 6-month plan that continues the work that our community has committed to and really focuses on our recovery efforts in the hopes that in the fall we can do some kind of broader community outreach effort to engage more folks as we had hoped and intended to do this year. So that's the overall recommendation. To further that, the leadership team has gone through and done a hopefully brief and accessible comprehensive update of the 2019-2020 priorities, how we are doing achieving each of those. Eric Vorwald has also done a crosswalk of these priorities to our master plan priorities, really wanting to make sure that document continues to be a living and breathing plan for our community that we are working on. So that's included in your packet, as well as a draft. And I want to really be clear that this is a draft of what our 2020 strategies for recovery could look like document. So those are before you in your packet. That's really what we want to present tonight, to just get your sense of, is interim plan acceptable, and given the June meeting agendas, where would you like to spend a little more time diving into those conversations? Or are you just good and we can move forward?
Thank you, Jesse. I think this came up several meetings back as the COVID-19 situation started out, and how that would impact our typical priority and planning session. I appreciate the thought that's gone into this and keeping us narrowly focused in the short term on really critical activities and responding to coming out of this pandemic, particularly because what's down the line is so unpredictable. It doesn't make sense to me to move forward with a broader strategy when we don't know what the landscape is going to be at that time. I I like the idea of moving forward in this method and having a future discussion about what those interim priorities are, and then revisiting the bigger picture, hopefully in the fall. Situation depending. Do members of council have other thoughts? Does this feel right to you? Questions, concerns about this approach?
I would just echo what the mayor said. You know, our lives are so unpredictable at this point. We don't know what's going to happen next week, next month. In a way, I wonder if 6 months is too far out for some of these goals and strategies. But I think that given the uncertainty, it's a good starting point for us. So I'm definitely in support of the plan.
Thanks, Amy. Hal?
Yes, I also think it's a very wise approach, given the unpredictability of what's happening next week, next month. So I support this approach.
Thanks, Hal. Jim, any concerns or questions from you?
Nope, I just will echo the same sentiment. I think this looks like a good approach and support revisiting this later.
So it does seem like we could, at a future meeting, actually dig into this draft of what those priorities are. I am looking towards our future meeting tracker. You know, we have 2 public hearings now scheduled for June 15th. We have one for June 1st as well. It seems to me like the June 1st meeting agenda is not too full at this time. That could be a good time to dig into these. And I think for me, I like the idea of getting into this sooner than later and starting to figure out what those priorities are and how we're going to move forward here. Do folks feel like that is good timing also? All right. It sounds like we can proceed as planned, as recommended from staff, and aim to revisit this on our June 1st agenda.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Oh, I should ask if there is any public comment first before I move on. Okay. Final item on our agenda. This item is on for approval, the city manager contract. So at our last meeting in executive session, we discussed a new contract to keep our city manager on board for an additional 3 years. The council sort of approved the content of what is proposed here in that executive session. And now we need to take a vote. For the public record, this contract reflects what has already been in place for our city manager, with the addition of formalizing her compensation, which was very ambiguous previously and is now formalized to align more closely to the compensation structure that we have for all non-union employees. Other than that, very few changes were made. And I personally am very excited to get it in writing that Jesse will stay on as our city manager for the next few years. So looking forward to taking a vote on this. Are there any questions or new concerns from council? Any public comment? So I would entertain a motion to approve the city manager contract.
I proudly so move.
Second.
Motion by Hal, second by Amy. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Now you just have to sign it, Jesse.
Now you're all stuck with me.
This brings us to the end of our agenda. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Amy, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Bye now.